Hello, this is Rajeswari Ramani. Welcome to another Asian Agribus podcast. In recent years, animal feed and feed raw materials have increasingly come to light as potential risk in transmitting disease-causing pathogens. Studies have shown that many of the viruses that cause animal diseases are stable in feed and feed raw materials, even during long-distance transport. Today, Asian Pork Magazine editor Isa Q. Tan is speaking with Dr. Scott D about the role played by feed raw materials in spreading diseases and how it can be addressed. Dr. D is currently Director of Applied Research at Pipestone Veterinary Services in the US. He has conducted many studies and authored papers on the pigs and feed, including the initial publications on the proof of concept of PED virus transmission in feed and the transboundary survival of the ASF virus in feed. A multi-awarded industry practitioner, he earned his DVM, MS, and PhD from the University of Minnesota.
Hi, Dr. D. Welcome to today's podcast.
Hi, nice to meet you again after so long.
Yeah, it's nice to see you again.
Yeah,
Um, there's been a lot of discussion about how feed raw materials and feed can spread virus and diseases, but many producers probably don't fully understand how they do. So I'd like to begin by asking you, how big a role do feed raw materials and feed play in the spread of diseases, and how do they compare with other disease vectors?
yeah, good question. It's hard to quantify because, feed is coming onto a farm every day. It's coming into the country every day, ingredients and such. It's really hard to quantify and say which is more risk, imported smuggled pork or just feed coming in regularly. I still think imported or smuggled pork is a higher risk because, at least for ASF, we know it lives a very long time in pork. And we know because of what we intercepted in the US, there's a great deal of meat being smuggled into the country. But the other side of the coin is, the feed's coming in all the time. And it's coming in legally, and it's coming into farms, and it's going into mills, and it's going over to the actual operations without any type of scrutiny.
Mhm.
So you kind of can balance it one way or the other. You say, well, if feed is a low risk, maybe it's not because it's a higher risk because of the way it's just kind of moving in uncontrolled. So it's a little bit of a tough question to answer, Isa, for the quantitative side of your question. But I guess I'll always say, smuggled pork is going to be of higher risk, but we don't really know because we're not testing any feed in the US. We don't have any idea what percent of shipments are positive. So we really don't know.
Okay. So it's basically because feed just goes in and out
Yeah.
without any checks whatsoever, or
Yeah,
very few checks.
think about it, at a farm, at every farm around the world, every day, there's a feed delivery. And
Mhm.
feed is coming into that farm, be it in Asia, be it in the US, it's coming in with no control. So that's happening all the time. And then you've got your imports. For example, in the US, we import soybean meal and all sorts of high risk ingredients from countries of high risk all the time.
Mhm.
Now we've changed that over time. We've pushed some pressure on that, and that's gone down as far as quantity, which is good. But it's been happening for it's a long time. So people kind of say, well, feed's a low risk. Well, it could be, but because of the frequency of the event, it might be higher than people think.
So, sure, in what ways can feed and feed raw materials transmit viruses? And are there particular viruses that are more effectively transmitted via raw materials? And on the other
Yes.
side of the coin, Are there particular raw materials that have a higher risk of transmitting the virus?
Yes, yes, and yes. So for the work that since 2014, when PED virus came into the United States, probably in feed from China, it was pretty hard to argue against that. We've been studying the risk of certain feed ingredients and certain viruses to work together, kind of a high risk combination. And the viruses that our group, as well as others, have shown, for example, Megan Niederwerder at Kansas State University, our group in Pipestone, Eric Nelson at South Dakota State, you've got African swine fever virus, you've got PED, you've got Seneca virus, you've got pseudorabies virus, you've got PRRS virus, you've got classical swine fever virus, and now foot and mouth disease, a recent publication from the Plum Island group, foot and mouth disease virus. All of these viruses live very well in feed, specifically in soy products.
Mm-hmm.
To your question about which ingredients are higher risk, soybean meal appears to be very protective for whatever reason we don't know, but it's very protective, and all of these viruses I just listed can be found to be viable in soybean meal for many, many months. So it's really an interesting combination of the right virus and the right ingredient. But it's been proven too many times to argue against it.
So it's really soybean meal. And are you doing more research on that?
Yeah, good question. I've asked that question. I made the first discovery about soybean meal and PED back in 2015. I reported that PED virus could live in soybean meal for 180 days. And since that time, ASF, foot and mouth, all the viruses I just listed, they all survive very well in soy, but nobody knows why. I've asked that question to many nutritionists. They don't have any idea. Everyone kind of considers, plant protein perhaps as a protective component. We spend a lot of time worrying about animal protein, but I think plant protein is even more of a risk than animal protein.
Okay, so there's probably a likelihood that we might need to search for other protein sources besides soybean as well.
Well, it's hard to argue for soybean meal is obviously the best source of protein, so it's hard to argue. I think the better approach is to manage it so you can safely introduce it into a country without bringing in viruses, because there are additives we've tested, there are holding times we're working on. There are ways that we can manage these ingredients safely into countries, but bulk grains is very difficult. It's much easier with fine ingredients like amino acids, vitamins. They're a lot easier to deal with.
To start that end, what should feed and livestock producers be on the lookout for when they're sourcing raw materials and feeds from other parts of the world so that they can minimize or avoid or prevent virus or disease transmission?
Mm-hmm. Good question. So in our company, Pipestone, we have a program where we introduce ingredients from other countries because it's so cost effective for our farmers. They can save so much money if they bring in the ingredients, the vitamins and such from other countries. And in some cases, we don't make the ingredients in the US, so they have to do that. So what we've developed is a two-pronged approach. One is when we bring in products from other countries, they go into a holding time, like a quarantine. We're working with a company called Sam Nutrition in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which actually will store our ingredients for a 30-day period at 22 Celsius, which we know is very antiviral. And then once it's released to the mills that feed our sow farms, they're using some feed additives that are well documented to be antiviral. So we've got a two-pronged approach, a holding time for imports. Then we've got a mitigation approach at the mill. So it's a really, really good. I think with that kind of approach, you're going to take the feed risk off the table. You're going to neutralize it. It's not going to be a problem anymore for you. So you can do this. You can make it safe, and it saves the producers a lot of money.
Would that be costly to do, Dr. D? Because I know one of the problems in this part of the world is it's always when you tell producers that these are some of the things they can do, cost is always the first thing that comes up. Would doing something like that, what could it do to costs?
Yeah, good question. Very good. Yes, indeed. There's always going to be a cost with these extra steps, but what we have seen so far, we've seen a reduction in overall feed cost, including the cost of doing this holding time. But we've still seen a reduction in cost because it's so cost beneficial to bring in vitamins, say, from China. They're so cheap compared to what we can do in the US, or maybe that's not even available in the US. So in spite of all these extra steps, there is still a cost benefit, and that's still getting worked out. So it's hard to quote you exactly a dollar figure. But I would say from the people I've talked with, we're seeing a reduction in feed costs of 5 to 7%, including the cost of these extra steps. So we're watching that. That's very important, but we're really paying attention to that at this time.
Okay, so the benefits would far outweigh the cost.
So far, that's, it's been a couple of years that we've been doing this, and so we're learning and we're gaining information and we're kind of watching things, and we'll adjust it accordingly. But right now, it appears that the cost benefit is positive for the producer. He or she pays less for feed because it's coming from other countries through this responsible imports safe approach.
How about feed producers and livestock producers, if they cannot totally avoid the risks of this virus transmission, are there other things that they can do besides that? I mean, technologies that are available that could help them achieve this?
I think the first thing the producer needs to do is he needs to first understand that the risk is real, that there's no discussion anymore. Feed can be a vehicle for moving viruses from place to place, either from country to country or from farm to farm. So question number one, is there a risk? Yes. Question number two is, what can I do about it? Like you're saying, I would say go to your mill and start asking questions about where they're bringing in products. Do you have products coming into your local mill that have been known to be protective of viruses, such as soy, and they're coming from countries of high risk, such as an ASF positive country? Find that basic stuff first. That's a really important first step, is to first realize it's a risk, and second, go to the mill and start asking questions. Just be a good detective and really try to figure out what's actually coming into my local area here, and are we doing anything to mitigate that risk? Do we have a responsible imports plan to hold ingredients, to treat ingredients through feed additives? What are we doing about all this? That's the best thing the producer can do, is just go and start asking questions.
So they need to know really what's there.
Yeah, you got to know. We have the AFIA, the Feed Industry Association, great group, and they've been really proactive in trying to help us with this. So there's probably groups in whatever country we're talking about today that are willing to work together, like our AFIA or another country's feed industry association. So I think the main thing is just to go out and start asking questions and start looking around.
What about with regards to feed biosecurity, Dr. D? Are there steps that can be done?
Well, we've kind of talked a little bit about that already. So there's a national approach, like Canada, for example, has taken, or Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Those countries, those continents, they have a plan for bringing in high-risk ingredients from high-risk countries. And they go into a controlled holding area. There's a lot of scrutiny, there's a lot of auditing, there's a lot of questionnaires that get filled out. So there's a whole bunch of oversight, which is fantastic. And they have the ability to send a shipment back if they haven't, crossed all the T's and dot all the I's. So that's That's like a country or a continental approach. That's really cool. We don't have that in the US yet. But what's happening in the US are big companies like Pipestone are looking at ways to set up their own holding time, to use additives to reduce risk, and just to start asking questions, and kind of figure where is this stuff coming from? It's kind of like a change in human behavior that I've never seen in my 35 years of veterinary medicine. It's like
Mhm.
taking feed and treating it like a breeding stock. So now with your breeding stock, you always have health papers and certificates and you have testing. Feed's going the same direction. People are asking, where is it coming from? What ingredient is it? What's the virus we're worried about? Are there alternative places we could get it? I mean, no one's ever thought about feed that way before. So I think this whole thing is really good because we're changing human behavior. And that's a big positive because it just makes it better for the farmer. It just protects the farmer. And that's what we're all involved in these days, is simply protecting our farmers.
Do you think now with the current processes available for producers and feed millers that there's really the chance of minimizing and if you're really careful about how you do things that you can basically erase the risks from feed or at least put it to such a negligible level that you don't have to worry about it?
I think that's a wonderful kind of way to sum this up, Isai's. You can never completely eliminate risk, as you said, but using what we know, we can take the risk to a point where I'd feel really comfortable in taking feed off the list of risk factors and allowing us then to put more effort on, say, smuggled meat or other things happening at the border. Between what we know about the protective, effective ingredients, the ability of certain viruses to live in feed, the use of additives as mitigants to reduce viral load, and then in combination with extended storage, we can check this one off the list. I mean, we've got so much ammunition against this risk factor. To your original question, what's its risk? Well, it's a heck of a lot lower if we're going to do some of these things that are actually being done now. So yeah, I think that's kind of how I look at it. We can take it off. It's like having a good transport sanitation protocol. If you have a transport sanitation protocol for your trucks, you're using the right disinfectant, you're using a drying time, some type of sanitation for the trucks that's been validated, you can take the trucks off the list too. And if you have a shower in protocol for your people coming in, you can take the people off the list. And if you have filters for your farms, you can take the airborne risk off the list. I mean, there's lots of good stuff out there that says this is, if you want to manage this risk, this is what you do.
So it's just a matter of looking for it, really, right?
I've been working on it for 20 some years. There's a lot of good data that says if you're worried about this, do this. If you're worried about that, do that. Yeah, it's looking for it, it's reading, it's being aware, it's talking to people, trusting in your vet, trusting in your feed supplier, and having a conversation, a comprehensive, kind of holistic approach. Here's my plan for biosecurity of my farm, and this is what I have to do. It's not that difficult anymore.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. D, for spending some time with me today. I really appreciate this, and I hope our audiences will be able to pick things up and that will help them.
I hope they go away with a positive feeling because, the biosecurity always kind of brings a negative, oh, it's too much work, it's too much money. We've got enough science now that says, we can do this. We can manage our farms. We can live with these diseases in the area. We can manage it. We can reduce the risk. So I hope they feel better after listening to this.
Okay, thank you very much again.
My pleasure. Nice to see you again.
As you have just heard, the risk of pathogen transmission through feed and feed raw materials is real, but that risk can be minimized cost effectively by paying attention to what these feed and raw materials are, where they are coming from, and implementing the right biosecurity and mitigation practices. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast. To listen to our other podcasts and to learn more about Asia's animal protein industry, visit www.asian-agribis.com. Join us again in our future podcasts. This is Rush signing off.